Hoy juntos con mucha anticipación que ustedes llegaran. We're here today very excited about the participation in these breakout sessions. ¿Hay alguien aquí que no habla o entiende inglés? ¿Estamos bien? Okay, so we're going to do this in English. Good afternoon. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Medina Lichtenstein, and I will be the moderator for this afternoon panel. The panel title is Local Activities in Action After Maria. And we have our three very distinguished colleagues here from different parts of the nation that have done incredible work and their experiences after, thank you so much, after the unfortunate Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, right? So, right, our families and our friends and our land were left without most of the most basic needs, right? Sometimes even to the point of loss of life. And at the diaspora level, we mobilized those with very little resources and sometimes those with much more far reach to be able to assist in not only getting supplies to La Isla, but also in waiting and supporting the evacuees who, for some, were left with no other choice but to leave the home that they knew. So today, what we would like to do is to hear from the three panelists about what was it that their role was, whether it was in collecting supplies, equipment to get to the island, or was it for them if it was them or their organizations or their coalitions that were able to mobilize and do same, waiting for the evacuees to arrive. But I am hoping that in the short period of time that we're here, we not only will hear from their experiences and they will share the knowledge that they have gained and who was part of their groups and, again, coalitions and membership, but also what did we walk away with? What were the experiences? What did we learn? God forbid there was to be another disaster that was to take place. How are our communities prepared? Are we preparing? We know that there's major climate change. Today at 12 o'clock, there was a huge manifestation right here in New York City regarding climate change. First it was in recognition of the anniversary of Hurricane Maria. It was up on Fifth Avenue, and then it was followed from 12 until, I believe, 3 o'clock around climate change. It's unfortunate that we're here, but that was an activity that was happening today, and that we need to recognize that right now that our Earth as we know it is changing because of these devastations, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in the Pacific, it's hitting all of us. And so what we're hoping is what kind of a footprint have we left? Is there a blueprint now moving forward? But we first are going to hear about how they each, in their own communities, were able to mobilize for Puerto Rico and for the diaspora here. We're going to start with Peter. And Peter, please excuse me. I'm not going to sabotage your name, please. Gudaitis. And Peter comes to us from the New York Disaster Interfaith Services. And before Peter starts, I want to let you know that in the summit right here, held here at October 2017, I was moderating another panel where someone said to me, well, if you're doing some work in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is where I come from, although originally a New Rican, you must go visit our center over at the center. And I took a cab and I ran over there, and I spent about an hour with Joanne, who was marvelous in showing me around, and it really shook me. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened in Holyoke after our panelists are able to describe what their experiences were. So Peter, it is a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad that you're here. And please.
So Gudaitis is a federation of faith-based social service agencies and philanthropies that work in New York City, and one of our responsibilities as an organization is to support service centers for disaster survivors that are set up by New York City. So the service center that was just referred to was set up by New York City Emergency Management at the Holyoke Center in Spanish Harlem, and that service center opened in October, just a few weeks after Maria, and it received some 2,000, is this not working? No,
Is there a keyboard?
it's a trick. We'll just, yeah, okay.
Just do the keyboard.
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 Basic.
Very technical now. Does that work? No, that doesn't work.
Oh, the mouse is.
That works.
You did it.
Okay.
Yes.
The mouse works? Yeah.
Back on board. All right, so the Julio de Burgos Center accepted just about 2,000 evacuees that arrived between October and February 8th, which was the overwhelming majority of evacuees to New York City that wanted help. We know that another 1,000 arrived through FEMA programs, but they did not seek services out at the service center, and we estimate another 2,000 families arrived but didn't need help. So either they doubled up with family, they got here on their own, but they didn't seek out assistance. So about 5,000 families in New York City. The average family size was around 3, so a minimum of 15,000 people. We also know a similar number arrived in Rochester, New York. And the best estimates we have were about 17,000 Puerto Ricans arrived across the state in the first 3 months, and then about somewhere over 20,000 in that period of time through February. Individuals, not families, obviously. This is when we begin to have challenges. So out of that group, 91%, so 91% of the 2,000 claimed that they wanted disaster case management services. In the end, only 300 signed up for disaster case management. Part of that was because it took a year for the state to release funds to open a disaster case management program. So the disaster case management program didn't really start until a year after Maria. It's been going on for a year, so it's just reaching its 1-year mark, and it has funding to last through February of 2020. The problem is there are almost 250 clients still in case management that need help, and yet we know that there's a lot more out there that need assistance, that just don't trust the system at all. So you can see from this slide, this is outreach to the families. So if we've left a voicemail for 1,200 families saying if you need help finding housing or a job, give us a phone call. But so far only about 300 have said yes. So we're having a problem with trust in the evacuee population. And this has been throughout the recovery effort. We distributed assistance early on. Very touchy, this thing. So just about $2.3 million in new clothing, and we've given away about $725,000 in cash assistance. And we need about $1 million just to help the clients we have, because the average household is costing somewhere around $6,000 to $8,000 to resettle. What they're getting is a FEPS voucher from the city, but it's often taking clients, evacuees, more than 1.5 years to find a landlord that will accept their FEPS voucher. Once they find that apartment and the landlord accepts the FEPS voucher, Most of them have been doubled up with family. Hundreds have been living in the New York City shelter system, so they don't have any money to buy furniture. But in New York City, if you don't have a bed for minor children, the city can remove children from your household. So the families are afraid of seeking out assistance because if they get caught up in the system, they're afraid their children might get taken away from them.
What's a FED voucher?
It's a federal HUD housing voucher.
So like a Section 8?
Different than Section 8, but it's a,
And how does that work?
you apply based on need.
How does the state get it?
It's HUD funded
Yep.
through the city. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you get a FEPS voucher, it takes a long time to find housing. Landlords by law cannot turn you down if you have a FEPS voucher or a Section 8 voucher, but they do. And they come up with shenanigans, like they advertise the rent being $1,200 for a 2-bedroom apartment, and when you get there and you don't speak English very well, they're not sure they want you, and you have a FEPS voucher, all of a sudden it's $1,500, and they want a side deal in cash. If you don't have income, you can't make that deal. It's not legal to make that deal. It's not legal for the landlord to ask. And the city has a program supposedly to investigate landlords that do that, but the clients don't have time. They don't have time to wait out an investigation and the landlord to be forced. So this is our challenge. Our challenge is getting apartments for the evacuee population. Many of them are still doubled up with family. Some of them are in the shelter system, a few hundred. And if you know anything about the New York City shelter system, being in the shelter system for a few days is traumatic. Being in the shelter system for a couple years is extraordinarily traumatic.
Is there a timeline for those vouchers?
You have to recertify over certain periods of time.
Oh,
Yeah. Every single evacuee from Puerto Rico has had to recertify their voucher at least once before they were able to find an apartment. Every single one. The shelter system is supposed to provide case management and help you find housing, and it doesn't. I don't care what anybody's selling you about this shelter system in New York City, it is not an effective system at all. And the contractors that run it, make a lot of money, and a lot of these people never find sustainable housing. So this is kind of where we are today. So we have 254 open cases. We have an 18% closure rate for the families seeking permanent housing since last fall. That's super low, but our rates are better than most of the other providers because we have cash assistance. But to get all these families, so it's been a year and we've closed 18%, to close 254 cases before the case management funding runs out in February would mean we need a lot more cash assistance and we need the landlords to accept a lot more FEPS vouchers. That being said, we also know that there's still that other almost 2,700 evacuee households out there. The return rates are high, so about 25% of the evacuees that arrived in New York City have returned to Puerto Rico. But we now have evacuees that return to Puerto Rico asking if we will help them come back. Because once they've gotten there, they haven't been able to rebuild their homes because they don't have the deeds to the land and they're getting turned down for their FEMA benefits. So they're desperate to come back. We will not bring a family back to the United States unless they have a job or a place to live. We won't bring people back here to put them in the shelter system. So far, we have not brought anybody from Puerto Rico back. They do show up on their own sometimes, but it's an ill-advised process because you're just shifting from one set of challenges to another just in a different location. We know most of the clients that are here are doubled up with family. So the question is, how long can that last? In some cases, it may last for the rest of their life. If you're 90 years old, 80 years old, 70 years old, your kids want you to live with them and they're going to support you, maybe that is where you're going to stay for the rest of your life. And about a third of the evacuees were over retirement age. But the other 2/3 were either single adults or parents with children, a lot of single parents with children. So they are of working age. The question is, how long is it going to take for them to find meaningful employment? Just to give you an example, almost all the evacuee families that are in the shelter system have jobs, but they are underpaid, right? So they aren't able to save money while they're in the shelter system to be able to buy their way into housing. They're just surviving based on their underemployment income. So maybe they work 20 hours a week, maybe they're working $10 an hour. That might pay for clothing and food and some things like that, but it's not enough money for them to leave the shelter system on their own by their savings. So we are hoping that we can pressure the Cuomo administration and Marcos Crespo, who was instrumental in helping get this original funding through the state. We're hoping that they'll extend the case management funds that are available to continue to help the evacuees that are here in New York City. 96% of all the evacuees that arrived here said that they wanted to stay, permanently resettle here. The fact that 25% have returned is not, some of them certainly changed their minds, obviously, along the way, but in most cases we feel like it's not because they wanted to go back, it's because they couldn't afford to stay here. They realized that it was much harder to stay here, the housing costs were much more, maybe when the power came back on, maybe they might get their house rebuilt. So that number is probably fluid. They went back, some of them want to return. We don't really know their status once they've returned. We know who is left. So out of that 3,000 or so that we can contact, we're somewhere down to about 2,250 that we can reach out to and we know that are still here in the city. So that's my stats.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Not only for presenting, but for being able to collect data despite the delay in receiving the funding. And we're going to come back to you.
Sure.
And we've got a little bit of, put it here. Lydia Valencia is from the New Jersey Puerto Rican Association, Puerto Rican Congress, excuse me. I got you and Nilda confused. Welcome. We know that people that arrived in New York also went to New Jersey and also went to Philly, but they came en route, right? Some came down from, came up even from Florida, which was the first point of emergency access. Tell us what your experiences were, please, in New Jersey.
Well, New Jersey is very different than most other states where most of our Puerto Rican community resides in one urban area. And I think Pennsylvania is experiencing now that diversity in that Allentown has grown and other areas, Lancaster and other areas have grown. But historically, our community has been dispersed all the way from Passaic County down to Salem County. Passaic, the northern counties, more on the manufacturing, and the immigration came from that point, and anywhere south of New Brunswick was farmland. That has slowly changed, and Camden being one of the cities, as I have analyzed, that received the most of the evacuees of Maria. Fortunately, the New Jersey Puerto Rican Congress was celebrating its convention at that same time, on September 20th of 2017. And we had over 400 attendees at this convention, leadership and stakeholders there. So it was an opportunity for us to be able to convey the need of the community, and Edwin and the center did a presentation was able to impact because when you heard it in the news, it was terrible, and most of us had family over there and couldn't communicate with them, and all of that devastation. So we kind of got firsthand knowledge of what was going on.